Hello and welcome. This explainer has been prepared by Samir Al-Rashani with some help from AI, and our goal is to help guide you through the world of Canadian taxes.
All right, let's get right into it. If you're starting your first job, I get it. The whole world of taxes can seem, well, pretty confusing, right? So our goal here is to break it all down, to demystify the Canadian tax system, and give you the tools you need to feel way more confident when it's your turn to file for the first time.
You know, it's the question we all ask ourselves when we look at our very first paycheck and see that chunk of money missing. Why? Why do we pay taxes? And where does that money actually go? To really get a handle on that, we're going to have to take a little trip back in time.
So to get a really clear picture, we're going to walk through 5 main areas together. We'll start with a quick history of tax in general, then zoom in on Canada's system today. After that, we'll get super practical. We're talking about decoding your own paycheck and then walking through how to file your very first return. And we'll wrap it all up by looking at your role in this whole system.
Okay, so let's kick things off at the very beginning. Section 1, a brief history of tax. You know, to really understand why our system works the way it does today, it helps to see how this whole idea of tax has changed over time, all the way from ancient Egypt right up to what comes out of your wallet today.
So what is a tax, really, when you boil it down? Well, it's basically a required payment that we all make to the government. And that money? It's used to pay for, well, everything. It supports the government itself and all the programs and services it provides for all of us. It's really one of the foundational building blocks of any organized society.
And here's where it gets kind of fun. Governments throughout history have been, well, let's just say creative with what they decided to tax. I mean, get this. In ancient Egypt, they taxed cooking oil. Fast forward to 1700s Russia, you had to pay a tax on your beard. In Amsterdam, your property tax was based on how wide your house was, which, by the way, is exactly why you see all those super tall, skinny houses there. Oh, and in feudal England, if you weren't keen on going to war, no problem. You could just pay a tax called scutage to get out of it.
So yeah, from beard taxes to skinny houses, it's clear this whole idea has been around for a long time. Which brings us right to our second section, taxes in Canada today. Let's dig into how our modern system actually works, what our money pays for, and, this is a big one, what your rights are as a taxpayer.
Canada's own tax history has some pretty interesting moments too. The very first tax on record here, way back in 1650, was actually on beaver pelts and moose hides. Can you imagine? Then, let's jump ahead to 1917. The government brought in what they called a temporary income tax to help finance World War I. Of course, as we all know, that temporary tax became permanent in 1948. And then in 1991, the GST was introduced. That's the tax most of us see on our receipts almost every single day.
So, the big question, what do we actually get for all this money? Well, the truth is, the benefits are literally all around us. Our tax dollars pay for things like hospitals and healthcare, our schools, the roads and highways we drive on every day. They fund our police and fire services that keep our communities safe, not to mention parks and social programs like old age security. It's really the collective investment we all make in the society we live in. Now, this next part is really important. Your relationship with the Canada Revenue Agency, the CRA, it's not a one-way street. There's something called the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, and it exists specifically to protect you. It all starts with a fundamental promise. You have the right to be treated professionally, courteously, and fairly. Period. And these aren't just vague ideas. They're very specific rights. For example, your financial info has to be kept private and confidential. If you ever disagree with a decision the CRA makes, you have the right to a formal review and an appeal. You also have the right to get information that's complete, accurate, and clear. And maybe the most important one, you have the right to pay exactly what the law requires, not a penny more and not a penny less. All right, let's shift gears from the big picture right down to your own pocket. Welcome to Section 3, Decoding Your Paycheck. This is where all that theory about taxes suddenly becomes very real, especially when you get that first paycheck. So before you even see your first dollar, there are 2 really important steps you got to take. First up, you need a social insurance number, or SIN. Think of it as your personal ID for the government. It's confidential, and you absolutely need one to work in Canada. Second, you'll fill out something called a TD1 form. This form is super important because it's how you tell your employer how much tax they should be taking off your pay.
Now, when you finally get that pay stub, you're going to see 2 main numbers that you need to know. First, there's gross pay. That's the big number, the total amount you earned before anyone takes anything out. Then there's net pay. That's what most people call your take-home pay. It's the amount that actually ends up in your bank account after all the deductions.
So let's see how you get from that big number to the smaller one.
Okay, let's check out a real-world example here. So we've got Joseph Mayer's pay stub. His gross pay is $1,200. Now look at the deductions. There's income tax, Canada Pension Plan, and employment insurance. Add all those up, and you get about $232 in deductions. So you take the $1,200, subtract the deductions, and what's left? That's his net pay, which comes out to $968.09.
So, what are those deductions actually for? Well, as you can see, the biggest piece of the pie is income tax. We've already talked about what that covers, but then there are the other two. You've got the Canada Pension Plan, or CPP. That's money set aside to provide you with an income when you eventually retire or if you become disabled. And then there's employment insurance, or EI. That's a safety net that gives you temporary financial help if you ever lose your job.
All right, now for what you might call the main event. It's Section 4, filing your first return. And I promise, we're going to go through it step by step with a simple example to show you it's really not as scary as it might seem.
The one document you absolutely positively need to do your taxes is your T4 slip. Your employer has to give it to you by the end of February. It's the law. Basically, this piece of paper is a summary of everything you earned and all the tax that was taken off your pay for the whole year. Think of it as the key that starts the engine for your tax return.
So let's walk through the whole process with a great example. Catherine Casey, who's a high school student. Step 1 is simple. Her T4 slip tells her exactly how much income she made. Step 2, she takes that number and puts it on her tax return. Now step 3, this is where the magic happens. She calculates her tax credits. These are things like the basic personal amount that pretty much every Canadian gets to claim. And then in the final step, those credits are used to slash the amount of tax she owes.
And here is the final result for Catherine. Her net federal tax, the amount she actually owes, 0. A big fat 0. So how is that possible? Well, it's because the value of her tax credits was actually more than the tax she was supposed to pay on her income. So all that money that was deducted from her paychecks throughout the year, she gets it all back. That's what we call a tax refund.
And that brings us to our final section, which is all about you and the tax system. Because the whole point of this is to change how you see your role. You're not just some passive person paying taxes. You're an active and hopefully an empowered participant.
So, if there's one thing to take away from all this, it's that filing a tax return is super important. Even if you're like Catherine and you don't owe any tax, it's the only way you can get a refund for any tax you might have overpaid. And it's also how you sign up for benefits like the GST/HST credit. You can think of your tax return as your financial story for the year. And when you understand the system, you get to be the one who makes sure that story is told correctly. So the only question left is, what will yours say?